Hello and thanks for joining us again. This week's topic is behaviour management. The video will include some information and tips on how to try and prevent challenging behaviour from occurring. So the behaviours we engage in for every moment of every day serve a function for us all. The four functions of behaviour are sensory, escape, attention and tangible. Here are some everyday examples of behaviours for each of those functions. So for sensory, this could be a behaviour that makes you feel good and you don't need anyone else to engage in that behaviour. It's just for you and it makes you feel better. So an example of this could be tapping your foot to your favourite song. For escape, this is a behaviour that allows you to avoid or gets you out of doing something that you don't really want to do. So an example of that could be asking your partner to do the washing up instead of you. For attention, this is a behaviour that brings another person's attention towards you. So an example could be calling up your friend for a chat. And for tangible, this is a behaviour that gets us access to the things that we like. These can be items, activities or places. An example of that could be ordering a takeaway pizza. However, we can all get frustrated for various reasons, and this can happen for our learners as well. Unfortunately, our learners struggle to express themselves so they can engage in challenging behaviour to change their environments to how they want them. Let's carry on thinking about the functions of behaviour and what these challenging behaviours might look like for our learners. So for sensory, someone could pinch themselves because it feels good to them. Escape, our learners could flop on the floor when they're asked to wash their hands for dinner. And for attention, our learners might run around and scream at their parent while they're talking on the phone to gain their attention. And for tangible, our learners might jump up and down shouting because they want the iPad. So to help determine the function of a behaviour, you can look at what happened just before the behaviour and also what happens immediately after. So in the example of escape, a parent or caregiver asked their learner to wash their hands. So straight after that, they flop to the floor. And in the past, they've avoided having to wash their hands because of this behaviour. So avoidance of hand washing is the reinforcing element in this example. So hopefully this has given you some ideas as to what functions of behaviour are. Remember, there are functions to all behaviour, not just challenging behaviour. The rest of the team will give you tips on how you may be able to prevent challenging behaviour from occurring and some appropriate alternatives to challenging behaviour.
Hi. As Nick mentioned, one function to challenging behaviour is sensory. So these are behaviours that make us feel good and we don't need anybody else around. They're self-stimulating. And there's a whole range of behaviours that can come under this function. So it could be that you sing in the shower because you like the way it sounds. It could be that you twiddle with your hair because you like the way it feels between your fingers. For some of our children, they like to hand flap because they like the way that it looks. Or for some learners, they might make different noises because they like the way that they sound. They all serve the function of being automatically reinforcing. It's really important when we're deciding to reduce some of these behaviours that we think about these three really important questions. So firstly, you want to ask yourself, is the behaviour harmful? Now, for some of our learners, they do engage in sensory behaviours that can be really harmful, such as kind of finger picking. They might like the way that it feels when they pick their finger, but actually they create sores. The second question you want to ask yourself, is it impacting their quality of life? Again, for some of our learners, they engage in these behaviours repetitively. So it could be actually that they're engaging them for prolonged periods of time and that might then be an issue. The third question you want to ask yourself is it impacting on their learning? So actually when you're kind of working with that individual, when you're trying to teach them new skills, is that behaviour becoming a barrier? So actually when you're trying to kind of engage them to start communicating, they can't communicate because they're using their hands to flap rather than using them to sign. Once you've kind of asked yourself these three questions, if the answer to any of them is yes, it is harmful or it's impacting their quality of life or it's kind of becoming a barrier to their learning, that's when we can kind of start looking at some different strategies maybe to reduce these behaviours. If you've answered those questions and actually it isn't an issue, then it's fine. We all engage in sensory behaviours. I fiddle my hair all the time, I sing in the shower. So sensory behaviours aren't an issue, only if it is or answering yes to one of those questions. The first strategy we're going to look at is teaching a functional alternative. So you may have identified a behaviour that serves the function of being sensory, but maybe you've answered yes to the question that is harmful to that individual, in which case it's really important that we reduce this behaviour. The first thing you want to do is identify what part of the behaviour the person's finding reinforcing. So for example, there might be someone that likes to hand clap, but actually they're doing it excessively for a long period of time and it's impacting their learning. Now with the hand clap, are they liking the way that it feels on their hand, or maybe they like the way that it sounds when they clap? Now if we look back to the example earlier of the person who was picking their fingers, Maybe they like the way that it feels when they peel off the skin and they roll it between their fingers. So if we use this for an example, what we could do is we want to block every time they engage in that behaviour. So every time the individual starts to pick their fingers, we're going to block that. And then we're going to prompt them to engage in a more appropriate behaviour. So maybe we can have some dried glue and we prompt them to pick and roll the dried glue instead. The second strategy we're going to look at is teaching an appropriate time or place. So if you've identified a behaviour that serves a function of sensory, but is not harmful to that individual, maybe they're just engaging in it for prolonged periods of time and it's affecting their quality of life, or maybe it's impacting on their learning, then we can teach them when and where it's okay to engage in those behaviours. Let's watch a short video clip of a boy and girl engaging in sensory behaviours.
Yeah.
Yes!
During that clip, you saw Hope and Jasper engaging in the sensory behaviours of dancing and Hope was playing with the ribbon. Now, these behaviours aren't harmful. However, when Hope goes to school, if she tries to dance when she's on the carpet learning, that's then going to be problematic. So we can teach her an appropriate place and time to dance. So you can dance during lunchtime, but you can't dance when you're on the carpet and you're learning. Another example of a sensory behaviour could be jumping up and down, because the person likes the way that it feels. But maybe they're engaging in this behaviour prolonged periods of times. Or maybe they're jumping up and down in front of the telly when their siblings are trying to watch a show. So what we could do in this example is we could then redirect them to jump somewhere more appropriate. So we could redirect them to ask for the trampoline and jump on the trampoline. Or if it's not possible to do that, then we need to teach them to wait until there is an appropriate time to engage in that behaviour.
Hi. So, as Nicola described earlier, another function to challenging behaviour is to escape or avoid situations that we dislike. This could mean avoiding a potential environment that we find aversive, like going to the dentist, or escaping from difficult tasks, like doing the washing up. For most of us, we know how to use the appropriate way to escape or avoid these types of situations. Like I could pick up the phone and cancel my dentist appointment, or I could buy myself a dishwasher to avoid having to do the washing up in the future. But we also know that sometimes we just have to face up to these situations that we dislike. For example, I wouldn't recommend calling and cancelling your dentist appointment, as this could result in some really painful toothache. So I'm going to share with you a few strategies that we could employ with our learners, both to help them cope with these situations that they find difficult, and to also teach them these appropriate ways to escape or avoid things in the future, rather than them having to engage in challenging behaviour. So, our first strategy is called pairing. Simply put, this means using reinforcement and pairing it with people, environments or stimuli until these become more pleasant for our learners and eventually they end up being reinforcing in themselves. As parents and carers, you've already built up good rapport with your children, so there's no need to pair yourselves with reinforcement. But this is the first and most crucial process that we employ when working with a new learner, so that they see us as someone fun who they want to engage and work with. Let's talk about pairing environments and use an example that I know can be a problem for a lot of our learners: going to the supermarket. Supermarkets are loud and busy places that not many people find enjoyable, but visiting them is a necessity to being independent and purchasing food for ourselves. We could pair this environment for our learner by bringing some of their favourite things with us, such as music, cuddly toys, snacks, or an iPad to watch videos on. We want to make the trip as enjoyable as possible, keeping demands to a minimum so that all they have to do initially is tolerate that environment. If it's somewhere they really cannot stand to be, you may need to initially work on building up the time that they can spend there, as well as providing lots of reinforcement. For example, to start with, you might just go in, buy a chocolate bar, use the self-service checkout, then leave. Once they start to see it as somewhere more positive, you can gradually start increasing the time that they're required to spend there and fade out how much reinforcement you deliver, until you can complete your whole weekly food shop with no problems. Our learners quite often don't have that much control over their lives as they're still learning how to express themselves. One strategy that often helps to reduce escape maintain challenging behaviour is to offer choice as much as possible, giving them that feeling of control back. As I've already mentioned, sometimes there are things in life that we don't like, but we just have to grin and bear. There's no choice about it. For these situations, a helpful tool to use with our learners is a first, then board. Here is an example of what this may look like. you would place a photo of the unpreferred activity on the left in the first column, but then let your learner choose the next activity and place that photo on the right. To start with, you may need to limit this choice to 2 or 3 things that you know they like for the second activity, as too much choice can sometimes be overwhelming. It's important to keep your language consistent when you introduce this concept and use the visual to support their understanding. For example, I want my learner to brush their teeth, and then they've chosen to do drawing. I'll hold up the board, point to the brushing teeth picture and say, first you need to brush your teeth, then you can do drawing. Another strategy that will help to encourage understanding of this as a new concept for your learner is to start off with a really quick first activity so that they can access the reinforcement quicker. For example, first you need to sit down, then you get your iPad. Let's watch a short video of a young boy who didn't want to come upstairs to brush his teeth.
Come upstairs and I'll cuddle you. Just come upstairs and I'll give you a big cuddle.
In that clip, you see the mum trying to encourage him up the stairs by promising a hug. However, he is already engaging in challenging behaviour in the form of crying and flopping to the floor, refusing to come up the stairs. It may have helped to use a first, then board before placing the demand to go up the stairs in the first place, and reminding him, first teeth brushing, then we can have a cuddle. So, our final strategy is to teach our learners something called functional communication. This is that appropriate behaviour that I mentioned earlier that most of us already know how to engage in. For example, you can call in sick to work when you feel unwell. If it's appropriate to escape or avoid a situation, we want to equip our learners with the necessary skills to be able to express themselves, to say that they don't like something or that they don't want to be somewhere. Depending on their skills, we could either teach them perhaps to sign stop, to say no, or to use an alternative method of communication such as selecting a picture. You all know your children inside and out, so you'll know the discrete signs to look out for when they're not happy with a situation or they don't want to do something. As soon as you see this motivation declared, you want to prompt the correct response. For example, no, stop, go, or whatever it may be. Try to keep the response simple and consistent so that it's easier for our learners to engage in this than it is for them to engage in challenging behaviour. If they are already displaying challenging behaviour, but it is appropriate for them to leave or not to have to do something, you can use something that we call a countermand. This is a complicated name for a very easy procedure. Basically, you would say something like, we can leave, but not for screaming. Stop screaming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you would prompt the correct response, for example, go. You can replace screaming with whatever the behaviour is that they're engaging in, and we want to get the count of 5 clear without any challenging behaviour. This is to teach them the appropriate alternative and that engaging in challenging behaviour isn't the option here and won't get their wants and needs met. Let's just finish with an example of this procedure that I quite often have to use with my husband.
Change the towel.
We can watch something else, but you don't need to whine about it.
Can you change the towel, please?
Yeah, of course.
Attention maintained challenging behaviour is as simple as the name. It is when an individual engages in challenging behaviour to get the attention they desire. It is important to note that this attention could be positive or negative. Take the example of a student misbehaving in class. They get attention in the form of the teacher telling them off. This could actually be reinforcing the behaviour if it were for attention, or they are getting feedback from the teacher, and even negative attention is better than no attention. Challenging behaviour to gain attention may be either due to the individual not yet knowing how to appropriately ask for attention, or it may be due to the fact that attention is not available at that time and they need to learn to wait. There are different strategies that we can use to tackle these two issues. The first strategy we could employ is called non-contingent attention. We would use this as a first step to help reduce challenging behaviour, whilst we work on building our learners' skills to appropriately gain attention in other ways. This strategy involves delivering your attention freely, regardless of your learner's behaviour and with no expectations for them to do anything for it. An example would be when your learner typically engages in challenging behaviour in the form of screaming to get your attention, roughly every 30 minutes. You set a reminder on your phone to vibrate every 25 minutes and you deliver attention in whatever form they most enjoy for a few minutes. This reduces the motivation to engage in challenging behaviour as they are accessing the attention they desire. Whilst this is meant to be attention delivered non-contingently, if they are engaging in challenging behaviour, it is best to wait for a pause before delivering your attention to try to avoid reinforcing this inappropriate behaviour. We do not want our learners thinking, oh, I scream and mum and dad come and play with me. I'll make sure I scream more often because that was fun. As I mentioned earlier, non-contingent attention is sometimes a necessary first step if our learners do not yet have the ability to appropriately gain attention. However, it doesn't help in teaching many of these important skills. Rhiannon mentioned when discussing escape, maintain, challenging behaviour, the strategy of teaching functional communication. This can also be applied to reduce challenging behaviour for attention. Every learner will display their motivation for attention in different ways. This may be really obvious in some cases. For example, they may run up to you making eye contact. In other cases, it could be more subtle. For an example, a slight shift in eye gaze. As parents and carers, you are best equipped to know these signs of motivation, and they are crucial when promoting functional communication. As soon as you see the first sign of motivation declared for your attention, you are going to prompt your learner to request appropriately. This will look different according to their abilities. For example, it could be them saying hello or perhaps tapping your arm. When prompting this communication, it's important to minimise attention as much as possible until the response is complete so that they learn that engaging in that positive behaviour is what gets them your attention. Similarly to teaching functional communication for escape, if they are already engaging in challenging behaviour, but it is an appropriate time to have your attention, you can run a countermand, but this time you are going to do it silently to minimise attention. It will look like this. You will hold your hand out to signal for them to stop engaging in challenging behaviour. Try to avoid using eye contact, and once they stop, you want to use your fingers to count to 5. Then prompt the appropriate communication and deliver attention. Teaching functional communication is the best way to give our learners a voice with which to express themselves and get their wants and needs met rather than engaging in challenging behaviour, which can often be distressing. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes your attention isn't always freely available. Therefore, we need to teach our learners how to tolerate waiting. Before we start teaching this more advanced skill, we want to be sure that they can consistently use the appropriate form of communication to request. This is a short clip of a young boy who knows how to ask his mum for a hug and now needs to learn to wait and tolerate her having time with his younger sibling.
I can't cuddle you all the time.
This video is an interesting example that demonstrates how we know for sure he's crying to gain attention. You can see his sister offering him a toy. If he were engaging in challenging behaviour to gain access to a tangible, then this may have been enough to stop his crying. However, he ignores the offer of the toy and continues to cry to try to convince his mum to pick him up. To help relieve any distress when teaching our learners these tricky skills, we want to start off with small increments of time that they are required to wait before gradually increasing the expectation. For example, your learner appropriately asks you to play, but you're in the middle of cooking dinner. You may say something like, "Yes, I can come and play, but first you need to wait." It is important to first acknowledge the request so they know you have understood what they are asking of you. Initially, you may only want to require a few seconds to increase the likelihood of success. If they engage in challenging behaviour or ask for your attention again, then simply repeat, "Yes, I can come and play, but you need to wait." Only deliver your attention once they have appropriately waited for the designated amount of time. Once they start to understand the concept and tolerate waiting more appropriately, you can gradually increase the time increments they are required to wait until you can cook a whole dinner in peace whilst they are happily engaged in their own time.
The last function of challenging behaviour we're going to look at is to gain access to tangible items. This could be desired items such as toys, food, activity or places. For example, a learner may want a toy which is out of sight or reach, and they do not have the appropriate communication skills in their repertoire to ask for the item. This may lead your learner to engage in challenging behaviour to gain access to it. We want to teach our learners the appropriate response to ask for items they may want without engaging in these challenging behaviours by improving their communication skills. Let's look at a video of a little girl engaging in challenging behaviour to gain access to an item she wants.
Did that to hope.
In this video, the little girl indicates she wants the item by reaching out, accompanied by whining and screaming. We want to teach her an appropriate response. Let's look at some strategies how we can increase our learners' communication skills and decrease challenging behaviours. The first strategy that we are going to discuss is man training. Man training teaches our learners a functional alternative to engaging in challenging behaviour. It's similar to functional communication training that Rihanna mentioned earlier. Man training teaches our learners to ask for specific items, activities or places they may want or need, such as a toy they want to play with or a drink if they are thirsty. Let's look at what man training may look like. Firstly, look for signs that the learner is interested in the item. Behaviours such as reaching out, gravitating towards areas where items may be kept that the learner wants. For example, the learner gravitates towards a cupboard within the kitchen, indicating that they want something within that cupboard. You get a bag of crisps out of the cupboard and the learner reaches out to take the crisps, declaring their desire for the crisps, but not engaging in any challenging behaviours. Now we are going to teach the learner the appropriate response for asking for the crisps. Provide a prompt of the appropriate response. For example, you can provide a prompt depending on your learner's method of communication. That could be vocal, sign or communication device. For a vocal learner, you might provide a vocal prompt by saying crisp, a slight physical prompt to sign crisp, or a gestural prompt to select the picture of the crisp. You can also provide social praise while you deliver the crisps. As stated before, we don't want our learners to become dependent on us providing them with a prompt to ask for things. We want them to ask for things they want independently. Think back to the self-help sessions and fading prompts. You can try to fade the prompts across the day or from day to day, depending on how many times a day you can practice this skill with your learner. Once they are getting the hang of requesting with your help, either using a vocal prompt or a physical prompt, then you could start to fade the amount of help you give them. Instead of vocally prompting them straight away, you could hold up the crisp and wait a couple of seconds to see if they ask on their own. It can be a bit trickier for learners who communicate using sign or a communication device, as we need to gradually fade our physical prompts from them to become more independent. Once our learners are consistently requesting independently, you can then teach them to tolerate a delay to receiving the item by gradually increasing the time they are required to wait for the item. Man training is the most important skill we can teach our learners. However, it can be tricky when they are already engaged in challenging behaviour to gain the access to the item. In this case, we do not want to deliver the item whilst they are engaging in challenging behaviour. Instead, we use the counter-man strategy. Let's look at the counter-man strategy again. If your learner wants the item but is displaying challenging behaviour, you can prompt the correct response by using the counter-man strategy. Rihanna demonstrated this strategy earlier when Will wanted to turn the TV channel over. In this example, the learner wants the crisp but is displaying challenging behaviours. You could say something like this: "You can have the crisp, but not for screaming. Stop screaming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you could prompt the correct response crisp and deliver the crisps. As stated earlier, remember this strategy is teaching the learner the appropriate alternative, and engaging in challenging behaviour won't result in the learner receiving the item. The last strategy we are going to look at is offering an alternative. Sometimes it's not possible for our learners to have access to items that they want. This may be more common during these times as many places are shut and preferred places or items are limited. For example, your learner may want a burger from a fast food chain but is shut. In this situation, you can offer an alternative item or activity to soften the blow when we have to say no. We can offer something that could be just as good as the thing we are saying no to. In the burger example, we could say, "You can't have a burger, but you can have a pizza from the freezer, as long as the pizzas are just as good as the burgers."
So, as we've seen, there are various strategies to manage challenging behaviour for each of the functions. It's important to remember that challenging behaviour can prevent our learners from accessing their community and may also get in the way of them learning new skills. Another option for reducing challenging behaviour is a principle called extinction. This means that we hold back what our learner wants while they are displaying challenging behaviour. For example, if we've asked our learner to wash their hands and they begin to display challenging behaviour, then we wouldn't allow them to escape, and we follow through with what we've asked them to do. The function here would be escape. It's important to note that extinction should be used with caution. Many learners can display behaviours that are harmful to themselves and others, which can make it difficult and unsafe to implement extinction. A common effect when using extinction is that challenging behaviour can get worse before it gets better. If it is unlikely that we are unable to use extinction and follow through with what we've said, then it may be better to reinforce less severe behaviours than trying to ride it out. For example, we could reinforce when our learner is whining rather than hitting themselves and others. We don't want to be in a situation where we are unable to follow through. For example, saying no to something or delivering our attention, and we end up delivering the thing that our learner wants on a more severe behaviour. This would mean that this behaviour is more likely to happen again in the future because it has been successful in gaining access to the reinforcer. Consistency is important when using extinction. We need to make sure that we can follow through every time our learner displays challenging behaviour. Another option for learners who display challenging behaviours that can be harmful to themselves or others, or are unable to safely run extinction, is to reduce likely triggers of the challenging behaviour. For example, if we know that demands are likely to cause challenging behaviour, then we could try to limit and reduce the demands that we place on our learner. So that's it for this week. Hopefully you found this week's video helpful. Please feel free to contact us with any queries or concerns on bbadmin@treetops.thurrock.sch.uk. You can also email us on this address to express any interest in the Zoom sessions as well. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.
Do more? Oh, that's so nice. Blow more kisses?